Through the beveled glass of my front door, I spotted a woman with flame-red hair moving around my kitchen, wearing my favorite silk robe. When she noticed me, her ruby lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She swung open the door, designer bracelet jangling, and leaned against the doorframe of the home I'd designed myself, brick by brick. "Oh, look who's back early," she purred. "Well, this is awkward. You see, Marcus decided he needed someone who actually makes him happy. So why don't you pack your things and leave? This is my house now." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The late September sun cast long shadows across my driveway as I pulled in, exhausted from the 14-hour drive from my mother's bedside in Denver. For 3 weeks, I'd been caring for her after her surgery, sleeping on a hospital cot and existing on vending machine coffee. All I wanted was a hot shower in my own bathroom and to collapse in my own bed. I noticed the unfamiliar silver Audi in the driveway immediately. A client of Marcus's, perhaps? My husband ran his architecture business from our home office and occasionally met with high-profile clients there. Yet something felt off. The curtains in our bedroom had been changed from the soft blue I'd carefully selected to a gaudy red, pattern I'd never allow in my home. As I approached the door, fumbling with my luggage and purse, I realized I couldn't see Marcus's Range Rover anywhere. He knew I was coming home today. We'd talked just last night, and he'd said he was looking forward to having me back. There had been something strange in his voice, a hesitation I'd attributed to poor cell reception in the mountains. The silver key felt cold against my palm as I stood frozen at my own front door. Through the beveled glass, I could see someone moving around in my kitchen, a woman with flame-red hair wearing my favorite silk robe. When she spotted me, her ruby lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She swung open the door, designer bracelet jangling, and leaned against the doorframe of the home I'd designed myself, brick by brick. "Oh, look who's back early," she purred. "Well, this is awkward. You see, Marcus decided he needed someone who actually makes him happy. So why don't you pack your things and leave? This is my house now." I stood there, my suitcase handle cutting into my palm from my tightening grip. "Who are you? And where is my husband?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt, a skill I'd perfected during years of negotiating as the head of restoration for the Metropolitan Museum's European Painting Division. "I'm Vanessa," she said, examining her manicured nails, the exact shade of red I'd seen splashed across Marcus's collar 2 months ago, which he'd dismissed as paint from a client meeting. "And Marcus is at a business dinner. He'll be so disappointed he missed your little visit." "Visit?" I stepped forward, forcing her to move back. "This is my house. I'm Renata Sinclair, and you're wearing my robe." Her laugh was like breaking crystal. "Oh, honey, not anymore. Marcus and I have been together for months. He was just waiting for the right time to tell you." She gestured broadly around the entryway, where I noticed several of my carefully curated antiques had disappeared, replaced by tacky modern pieces. "We've been redecorating. Your taste is so museum-like." I pushed past her into my living room, shock giving way to anger. The abstract painting I'd restored myself, a wedding gift from my mentor, was gone, replaced by a garish print that looked like it came from a hotel liquidation sale. Photos of Marcus and me had vanished from the mantel, now displaying shots of him with this red-headed stranger at beaches, restaurants, parties. "Where are my things?" I demanded, moving toward our bedroom. She followed, her stilettos clicking on the hardwood floors I'd painstakingly selected. "Some are in boxes in the garage," she said with exaggerated nonchalance. "The rest, well, Marcus thought they didn't really suit the new direction of the house." I flung open the bedroom door to find our carefully curated minimalist sanctuary transformed into something resembling a brothel. Red satin bedding, My husband's clothes neatly hanging alongside unfamiliar women's clothing in our closet, and the antique vanity my grandmother had left me was nowhere to be seen. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Marcus. "We need to talk when you get home tomorrow." Tomorrow? He didn't even remember I was coming home today. I turned to face Vanessa, who was examining herself in what had been my mirror. "You need to leave. Now." She smirked, tugging the belt of my robe tighter. "Actually, I don't. I have Marcus's permission to be here, and he's the one whose name is on the deed, isn't it?" A cold weight settled in my stomach. When we'd bought the house 5 years ago, we'd agreed to put it in Marcus's name for tax purposes related to his business. My mistake had been trusting that our marriage was stronger than a legal document. "Marcus wouldn't do this," I said, though the evidence surrounding me suggested otherwise. "He wouldn't just replace me while I was caring for my sick mother." "Men do what makes them happy, Renata," Vanessa said, her voice dropping into false sympathy. "And you haven't made Marcus happy for a very long time. Did you really think all those late nights were about work? All those business trips?" She laughed again, settling herself on the edge of what had been my bed. "He's been planning this for months. The only reason he didn't serve you divorce papers is because it would look bad. Abandoning his wife while her mother was ill. He's just been waiting for the right moment." I felt my professional composure cracking. "Get out of my house." "It's not your house anymore," she replied calmly. "Check your accounts if you don't believe me. Marcus has been quite busy while you've been playing nurse." With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. My stomach dropped as I saw the joint account we'd maintained for household expenses had been drained, with a final withdrawal 3 days ago. My separate personal account appeared untouched, thank God, but the implications were clear. "This is illegal," I said, my mind racing through options. "You can't just move into someone's house and take over." "It's not illegal when the owner invites you," she countered. "Marcus said you'd react this way. So dramatic. He left you a letter in his office if you don't believe me. Something about irreconcilable differences and growing apart." She waved her hand dismissively. Typical divorce boilerplate. I stormed past her to Marcus's home office, the one room that looked untouched. On his desk was an envelope with my name written in his familiar, architect-precise handwriting. Before I could reach for it, my phone rang. My best friend and colleague, Nina. "Not now," I muttered, sending it to voicemail. "That's right," Vanessa said from the doorway. "You focus on accepting reality. I need to finish packing up those hideous art books of yours. Marcus wants to convert the library into a home gym." As she sauntered away, I noticed something odd, a flash of recognition when my phone screen had lit up with Nina's name and photo. It was brief, just a micro-expression, but in my line of work, analyzing facial details was second nature. My phone buzzed with a text from Nina. "Don't react. Don't sign anything. Found something about Marcus's new friend. Meet me ASAP. She's not who you think." I slipped the unopened letter into my pocket, suddenly feeling like I needed to play this situation more carefully. Whatever game Marcus and this woman were playing, I needed more information before making my next move. "I need some air," I announced, walking back toward the front door where my suitcase still stood. Vanessa appeared from the kitchen, now drinking from my favorite handmade ceramic mug. "Take all the time you need to process, but I'd start looking for a new place if I were you. Marcus said you can have until the weekend to get your things." As I stepped outside, the door closing behind me with a final sounding click, I took a deep breath of the autumn air. 3 weeks ago, I'd left my perfect life to care for my mother. Now I was locked out of my own home, replaced by a woman wearing my clothes, drinking from my mug, and sleeping in my bed. I pulled out my phone and texted Nina back. "Where and when? You won't believe what I just walked into." Her response was immediate. The Westlake Coffee Shop. 20 minutes. And Ren? Bring your passport from the safe deposit box. You're going to need it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Westlake Coffee Shop sat at the corner of Maple and 3rd, its warm lights a beacon against the darkening evening sky. I'd chosen this place for Marcus and me on our first date 7 years ago, charmed by its mismatched vintage furniture and local art displays. Now it felt like a remnant from someone else's life. Nina was already waiting, her dark curls pulled back in a severe bun that signaled she was in full investigative mode. Before joining the museum's restoration team, she'd worked in art fraud investigation, a background that made her both meticulous and paranoid. Those qualities had never seemed more valuable than now. "You look like hell," she said, pushing a steaming mug toward me as I slid into the booth. "That tends to happen when you find another woman has colonized your life." I wrapped my hands around the mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. "She's wearing my clothes, Nina, my robe, using my things like they're hers." "Did you bring your passport?" Nina asked, glancing at my bag. I nodded, patting my purse where I'd tucked the document I'd retrieved from the bank on my way here. "Going to tell me why I needed it?" Nina pulled out her tablet and slid it across the table. "Because the woman in your house isn't Vanessa Miller like she's claiming. Her real name is Veronica Mercer. Ring any bells?" The name didn't, but the face on the screen certainly did. Younger, with brown hair instead of red, but unmistakably the same woman who was now sleeping in my bed. "That's her. Who is she?" "A con artist who's been working variations of the same scam for at least 5 years." Nina scrolled through several news articles and police reports. "She finds successful men, preferably married ones with assets, works her way into their lives, and then helps them transition out of their marriages, usually by draining accounts and manipulating property transfers before the wife even knows what's happening." My stomach tightened. "That's what she's doing to Marcus? Scamming him?" Nina's expression softened with sympathy. "Ren, this is the hardest part. Look at the dates on these reports." I scanned the information, noticing the pattern of incidents, stretched back over 5 years across 3 states. But what caught my eye was a report from 18 months ago, a formal complaint filed by one Mrs. Diana Whitaker against her husband Jeffrey and his business associate Veronica Mercer. 18 months, I whispered. That's when Marcus started the Pacific Shores Resort project. And when he suddenly needed to make all those trips to California, Nina added gently. "Ren, I don't think this is a new thing. The bank transfers I found started small, consulting fees to a VM design group, but they've been happening for over a year." I thought back to the changes in Marcus over the past year. The new clothes, the sudden interest in fitness, the late nights and weekend, client meetings, all the classic signs I'd been too busy, too trusting to properly interrogate. "How did you find all this?" I asked, scrolling through more evidence of Veronica's past schemes. When Marcus mentioned his new interior design consultant at the holiday party last year, something felt off. The way he avoided introducing her to anyone from the museum. I started digging. Nina pulled out a flash drive. There's more. Financial records, emails, even recordings of phone calls between them discussing how to handle you. I felt physically ill. "You've been investigating my husband for months and didn't tell me?" "I needed proof before coming to you, and then your mother got sick, and the timing was..." She trailed off, looking genuinely conflicted. "I'm sorry. Ren, I should have told you sooner. How did she do it? Get Marcus involved in all this? He's not stupid." Despite everything, I still couldn't reconcile the methodical, ethical architect I'd married with someone who would participate in fraud. From what I can piece together, she approached him legitimately at first, as an interior designer interested in collaborating on the resort project. Then things got personal. Nina hesitated. "Men like Marcus, Successful, somewhat egotistical, they're perfect targets. She makes them feel special, understood. Then she starts isolating them from friends and family, creating an us-against-them mentality. The letter in my pocket suddenly felt heavier. She mentioned a letter from Marcus in his office, about divorce. Don't open it, Nina warned. At least not until we talk to a lawyer. If he's following her playbook, it'll contain some kind of document they want you to sign, probably giving up rights to the house or business assets. A memory surfaced, Marcus asking me to sign papers for a business restructuring the night before I left for Denver. I'd been distracted with packing and preparations, told him I'd look at them when I returned. Had that been their original plan? To have me sign away everything before discovering the affair? Nina, I said slowly. The resort project. Marcus said they broke ground last month. That's a multi-million-dollar development with investor money involved. Nina nodded grimly. That's what worries me most. Based on her previous patterns, Veronica doesn't just go after personal assets. She targets business accounts too, especially ones with incoming investor funds that can be diverted. My professional training kicked in. Years of authenticating. Artwork had taught me to look for inconsistencies, to reconstruct timelines, to find the truth hidden beneath layers of deception. We need to see those business accounts, I said. If they're planning to misappropriate investor funds? That elevates this from nasty divorce territory to federal fraud charges, Nina finished. I have a contact at the FBI's white-collar division, former client from the gallery. But we need more than suspicions, Ren. I pulled out my phone, navigating to the Password Keeper app where Marcus and I had stored our login information for household matters. To my surprise, it still worked. Apparently, he hadn't thought to lock me out of this yet. He created a separate business account for the resort project, I said, finding the login information. He gave me access in case anything happened to him. The investors insisted all principals have a backup signer. I entered the credentials, and the account details populated on my screen. The blood drained from my face as I saw the recent activity. Nina, look at this. 3 transfers in the past week, totaling $4.2 million to an offshore account. I turned the phone toward her. The development funds are being drained. Nina's eyes widened. That's it. That's all we need. She pulled out her own phone. I'm calling Daniel at the FBI now. Don't go back to the house, Ren. If they realize you've seen these transfers... I have to, I interrupted. My mother's paintings are there. My restoration notes. My entire professional life is in that house, Nina. Those things aren't worth your safety, she argued. Veronica has gotten violent in the past when her schemes were threatened. One of her previous targets ended up in the hospital. I thought about the woman lounging in my home, wearing my clothes, planning to steal millions while destroying my husband's career and reputation along with our marriage. Anger crystallized within me, hardening my resolve. I'm not running away from my own house, I said firmly. Besides, I don't think Veronica knows I have access to the business accounts. As far as she knows, I'm just the devastated wife who discovered her husband's affair. Nina looked unconvinced. What's your plan? Walk back in and pretend you haven't discovered their scheme? Exactly. I pulled Professor Harrington's worn copy of Art Forensics and Authentication from my bag, my mentor's gift when I completed my doctorate. He taught me that sometimes to expose a forgery, you have to let the forger believe they've succeeded. This isn't a fake Rembrandt, Ren. These are dangerous people moving millions in stolen funds. All the more reason to play along until the FBI can build their case. I closed the banking app and tucked my phone away. I'll go back, act devastated but resigned. Tell them I need a few days to find a new place. Meanwhile, I'll document everything I can. Nina shook her head, but I could see her reluctant admiration. Professor Harrington also taught us not to take unnecessary risks with priceless artifacts. You qualify as priceless, Ren. I'm also irreplaceable, I said with a grim smile, which is why I'm not letting them take everything I've worked for. As Nina made her call to the FBI, I stared out at the darkening street, mentally cataloging what I needed to retrieve from the house and what I could leave behind. The life I'd built with Marcus was already gone, had been gone for longer than I'd realized. But my work, my research, my identity beyond being Marcus Sinclair's wife, those were worth fighting for. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hope you're settling matters with your friend. Remember, I need those books from your office. Don't make this difficult, Renata. M. Marcus, texting me from a number I didn't recognize. Another piece of evidence that this betrayal had been methodically planned. Daniel can meet us tomorrow morning, Nina said, ending her call. He wants all the evidence we have, especially those bank transfers. I nodded, tucking the professor's book back into my bag. Then I have until morning to gather what I need. From the house. I'm coming with you, Nina insisted. If you're determined to go back tonight, you're not going alone. As we left the coffee shop, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. In the museum world, we had a term for when an artwork wasn't what it claimed to be, a misattribution. My entire marriage, it seemed, had been misattributed. The man I thought I knew, the life I thought I had, all revealed as elaborate fakes. But unlike a forged painting, which could simply be removed from display once discovered, this deception had real consequences. People's investments, livelihoods, and futures were at stake, including mine. I texted back to the unknown number. I'll be there in an hour, still processing everything. Need time. The response came quickly. Don't take too long. V is getting impatient. Perfect, I thought. Let them believe I was still the shocked, compliant wife, unaware of their larger scheme. Let them think I was broken. By tomorrow, they'd discover just how mistaken that assumption was. Nina's sensible. Sedan idled half a block from my house, its headlights extinguished. The silver Audi still dominated the driveway, but now Marcus's Range Rover sat beside it, its presence confirming that my husband was indeed home. Light spilled from the windows of what had once been our sanctuary, illuminating the Japanese maple we'd planted on our first anniversary. I still think this is a mistake, Nina murmured, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. We could call the police right now. And say what? That my husband's girlfriend is wearing my bathrobe? That I don't like their redecorating choices? I checked my reflection in the visor mirror, deliberately mussing my hair and smudging my mascara slightly. If I was going to play the devastated wife, I needed to look the part. Without the FBI building a proper case on the financial fraud, this is just an ugly divorce scenario. Nina handed me a small device that resembled a USB charger. Plug this into any outlet in the house. It's a recording device, audio and limited video. It might help build the case. I raised an eyebrow. Should I ask why you have surveillance equipment readily available? Let's just say art fraud investigation. Requires creative resources. She squeezed my hand. Text me every 30 minutes. If I don't hear from you, I'm calling 911. I'll be fine, I assured her, though my pounding heart suggested otherwise. Remember, they think I'm just a heartbroken wife scrambling to adjust. They have no reason to suspect I know about the financial scheme. With a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked toward my home, adopting a slightly slumped posture that conveyed defeat. As I approached the front door, I hesitated. Should I knock on my own door or use my key? The decision was made for me when the door swung open, revealing Marcus in casual clothes I didn't recognize. Renata. His voice was flat, neither welcoming nor hostile. I searched his face, the strong jaw I'd once traced with my fingertips, the blue eyes that had crinkled when he laughed, looking for any sign of the man I'd married. Instead, I found a stranger wearing my husband's features, guarded and distant. "I need to get some of my things," I said, my voice deliberately small. "Just work materials I can't replace." He stepped aside to let me enter, and I noticed he smelled different. An unfamiliar cologne replacing the sandalwood scent I'd given him every Christmas. Another small death in a day full of them. "Vanessa told me you stopped by earlier." He closed the door behind me. "I was going to call you tomorrow to discuss arrangements." "Arrangements," I echoed, the word tasting bitter. "Is that what we're calling this?" From the kitchen emerged Veronica. Vanessa, I reminded myself. That's who she was pretending to be. Still wearing my silk robe, now paired with slim black pants that also looked suspiciously like mine. She carried a glass of what appeared to be my special occasion Cabernet. "You're back," she observed unnecessarily, leaning against Marcus possessively. "Did you read the letter?" I patted my pocket where the unopened envelope remained. "Not yet. I needed some time to process." Marcus had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Renata, I know this is a shock, but I've been unhappy for a long time. We both have been. This isn't working anymore." "By this, you mean our 7-year marriage? The life we built together?" I allowed my voice to crack, which wasn't difficult given the circumstances. "When exactly did you decide that, Marcus? Before or after you started sleeping with your interior designer?" Veronica rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, spare us the wounded wife routine. Marcus has been miserable for years, stuck with a woman more married to her museum job than to him." I bit back the urge to point out that my museum job had funded the down payment on this house while Marcus's architecture firm was still establishing itself. Instead, I let tears well in my eyes, partially for show, partially because despite everything, this betrayal cut bone deep. "I just need my research materials from the study," I said quietly, "and some clothes. I'll find a hotel for tonight." "You can use the guest room," Marcus offered, earning a sharp look from Veronica. "Just for tonight. We can discuss the details of the separation tomorrow." "How generous of you," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice, offering me the guest room in my own home. As I moved toward the study, I surreptitiously plugged Nina's device into an outlet in the hallway, positioning it behind a small table where it wouldn't be noticed. The study door was closed, unusual, since it had always been left open to showcase the custom bookshelves Marcus had designed for my art history collection. I turned the handle, finding it locked. "Oh, sorry," Veronica said, not sounding sorry at all as she produced a key from her pocket. "We've been organizing in there. Marcus is converting it to a proper office for both of us to use." The study had been transformed. My carefully organized research materials were boxed haphazardly in the corner. The antique desk my father had restored for me was pushed against the wall, replaced by a sleek glass monstrosity that dominated the center of the room. Blueprints and design boards leaned against the walls, sketches for the Pacific Shores Resort project. "Where are my restoration notes?" I asked, panic rising as I searched for the leather portfolio case that contained 5 years of detailed documentation on Renaissance painting techniques. "And my external hard drives?" "In the boxes," Marcus waved vaguely toward the corner. We needed to clear space. I knelt beside the boxes, finding my materials thrown together without any organization. Delicate archival papers mixed with heavy books, USB drives loose among paper clips. The careful system I'd developed over years of research destroyed in a matter of days. As I began extracting my most crucial materials, I noticed one of the resort design boards had fallen forward, revealing another board behind it. From my angle on the floor, I could see it wasn't a design sketch but what appeared to be a financial flowchart. Boxes and arrows connecting various entities, with offshore banking information clearly visible. I quickly looked away, continuing to sort through my materials while capturing a mental snapshot of what I'd seen. They had the entire scheme mapped out right here in the study. No wonder they'd locked the door. "Don't take too long," Veronica called from the doorway. "Marcus and I have dinner reservations at Corsica at 8. Corsica? The intimate French restaurant where Marcus had proposed to me. Another deliberate twist of the knife. "I won't be long," I promised, my mind racing as I salvaged what I could from the boxes. My portfolio case was intact, though disorganized. The external hard drives appeared undamaged, but my laptop was nowhere to be found. "Where's my computer?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Marcus appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "I had to reclaim it. It was purchased through the firm." "It has all my research," I protested. 5 years of work." "We transferred your personal files to a USB drive," he said dismissively. "It's in one of those boxes." I bit my tongue, knowing that a real argument would jeopardize my charade of defeated compliance. Instead, I continued, gathering my materials, mentally cataloging what was missing, what might have been accessed. As I worked, my phone buzzed with a text from Nina. "Status update?" I typed back quickly. "In the study. Found evidence. Need more time." 30 minutes, max," came her reply. I stood, arms full of materials. "I need to get some clothes from the bedroom." Marcus nodded stiffly, leading the way. Our bedroom, now their bedroom, had been further transformed since my earlier visit. More of my things had disappeared, replaced by Veronica's possessions. The dresser where I'd kept my jewelry was conspicuously absent. "Where's my dresser?" I asked, unable to keep the alarm from my voice. "The walnut one with my grandmother's jewelry?" "In storage," Marcus answered too quickly. "We needed the space." Veronica smirked from where she lounged against the doorframe. "Don't worry, your little trinkets are safe." I doubted that very much, but again swallowed my response. Instead, I moved to the closet, finding most of my clothes pushed to one end, many items missing altogether. I grabbed enough for a few days, along with toiletries from the bathroom where Veronica's expensive products now dominated the counters. As I packed, I noticed a folder lying partially open on what had been my nightstand. The label was clearly visible. Pacific Shores Resort, transfer documents. Beside it lay a legal pad with notes in Veronica's handwriting. Investor funds. To Cayman Act. Complete by Friday. RS signature still needed for BVI Corporation. My signature. They still needed my signature on something related to the British Virgin Islands Corporation. That's why they were allowing me in the house at all. They needed something from me to complete their scheme. "I should get my things from the safe," I said casually, moving toward the walk-in closet where our wall safe was hidden behind a sliding panel. "Already emptied it," Marcus said quickly. "Your passport and personal documents are in this envelope." He handed me a large manila envelope that felt suspiciously light. I opened it, finding my passport, but noting the absence of my birth certificate, social security card, and several other important documents. "Where's everything else?" "Must be in the other envelope in my office," he said unconvincingly. "I'll find it tomorrow." I nodded as if I believed him, tucking the envelope into my bag along with the letter I still hadn't opened. The weight of their deception was becoming clearer by the minute. They weren't just planning to divorce me and take the house. They were systematically erasing me, assuming control of my identity along with my possessions. "I think I have everything essential. For now," I said, hefting my hastily packed bag. "I'll come back for the rest once I've found a place." Marcus checked his watch impatiently. "We should discuss the legal aspects tomorrow. My lawyer has drawn up papers that would make this transition smoother for everyone." "I'm sure he has," I murmured, following them back to the front door. "I'll need some time to review everything." "Don't take too long," Veronica advised with false sweetness. Marcus has been more than generous with the settlement offer, considering, well, everything. Considering what? I couldn't help asking. She exchanged a look with Marcus before answering. Considering your contributions to the marriage have been primarily focused on your career, rather than supporting his. The irony was so thick I could hardly breathe through it. My career had supported us during the lean years. My connections had introduced Marcus to the investors who funded his first major projects. My inheritance from my grandfather had paid off Marcus's student loans. I'll keep that in mind, I said, stepping through the doorway into the cool night air. Enjoy your dinner at Corsica. Try the coq au vin. It was always Marcus's favorite. The door closed behind me with a decisive click. I walked slowly down the path, waiting until I'd turned the corner before texting Nina. Coming out now. Have everything we need. Her car headlights flicked on, and I quickened my pace, the weight of what I'd discovered propelling me forward. In my bag were not just my essential research materials, but critical evidence of their scheme. Photographs I'd surreptitiously taken of the financial flowchart, the notes about the BVI Corporation, the transfer documents. As I slid into Nina's car, she immediately pulled away from the curb. Well, how bad is it? Worse than we thought? I said, finally allowing my carefully maintained facade to crumble. They're not just embezzling from the resort project, they've stolen my identity documents, my professional research, even my grandmother's jewelry. And they need my signature for something related to an offshore account. That's why they're pretending to negotiate. Nina navigated through the residential streets toward the highway. Daniel wants to meet us at the field office tonight, not tomorrow. I sent him the banking screenshots while you were inside. I leaned back against the headrest, exhaustion and adrenaline warring in my system. They've thought of everything, Nina. The house, the accounts, even my personal history. They're systematically erasing me. Not everything, Nina corrected grimly. They didn't count on you coming home early from Denver. They didn't count on you having access to the business accounts. And they certainly didn't count on you having a suspicious friend who's been documenting their activities for months. I thought about the Marcus I thought I'd married. Thoughtful, creative, ethical. And the stranger who'd stood in our bedroom, calmly lying about the whereabouts of my possessions. Had he ever been the person I believed him to be? Or had that, too, been a carefully crafted facade? We're going to stop them, Nina promised, reaching over to squeeze my hand. But first, let's see exactly what they're planning. The FBI will want every detail. As we drove toward the federal building downtown, I finally opened the letter from Marcus, revealing not just divorce papers but documents transferring my rights to our shared business entities, including my authorized signature role on the resort project. Had I signed these in my distracted state before leaving for Denver, I would have unknowingly facilitated their entire scheme. The final piece clicked into place. They hadn't just been waiting for me to leave town to move Veronica in. They'd been counting on my mother's illness as the perfect distraction to complete their financial fraud. Every aspect of their plan leveraged my trust, my distraction, my love for my family. I want them to pay for this, I said quietly, staring at the forged signature lines where I was supposed to sign away my life. Not just legally, I want them to understand what they tried to take from me. Nina glanced at me, concern mixing with determination in her expression. First things first, let's make sure they face justice. Then we can talk about karma. The federal building came into view, its windows glowing against the night sky. I felt something shift within me, grief giving way to resolve, betrayal hardening into purpose. My husband and his mistress hadn't just moved into my house while I was away. They'd tried to steal my entire existence, and that was a theft I would not allow to succeed. The FBI field office hummed with quiet efficiency even at this late hour. Agent Daniel Merritt led us through a maze of cubicles to a glass-walled conference room where a woman in a crisp suit was already reviewing documents. "Renata Sinclair, this is Special Agent Lena Winters, our financial crimes specialist," Daniel introduced us. With his salt and pepper beard and rumpled blazer, he looked more like a college professor than an FBI agent, but his eyes were sharp with intelligence. Lena stood to shake my hand, her grip firm. "Ms. Sinclair, I'm sorry about your situation. We've been tracking Veronica Mercer for quite some time, but she's been elusive." "You know her?" I asked, setting my bags on the conference table. "We have a file." Lena gestured to a thick folder. "She's operated under at least 7 different identities that we know of. Usually targets wealthy professionals, doctors, lawyers, executives. Your husband is her first architect, as far as we can tell." I flinched at "your husband," the phrase now carrying an entirely different meaning than it had this morning. "She's escalating," Daniel added, taking a seat. "Previous schemes involved smaller amounts, hundreds of thousands, not millions. And she usually abandons her targets once she's extracted what she wants. The fact that she's moved into your home suggests a longer con." Nina placed her laptop on the table. "I've been tracking their communications for the past 3 months. Emails, text messages I could access through cloud backups, financial transfers. That evidence may not be admissible," Lena cautioned, "given how it was obtained." "But it can point us in the right direction," Daniel countered. "Ms. Sinclair, we need to understand exactly what they're doing with the Pacific Shores development. Funds." I unpacked my hastily gathered materials, spreading them across the table. The photographs I'd taken of the financial flowchart, the transfer documents, the notes about the BVI Corporation. "They've already moved $2 million to an offshore account," I explained, pulling up the banking app on my phone. "And according to these notes, they're planning to complete the transfers by Friday. That's in 2 days." Lena studied the financial flowchart. "Classic layering technique. They're moving the funds through multiple accounts to obscure the trail. But they still need my signature for something related to a British Virgin Islands corporation," I added, showing them Veronica's notes. "That's why they're keeping me somewhat in the loop. They need me to sign these documents." I placed Marcus's envelope on the table. Daniel examined the papers inside. "These transfer your signatory authority on the business accounts to Marcus exclusively. If you'd signed these, he could have moved the remaining funds without needing your approval." "The investors," I said, suddenly remembering something. "There was a provision in the investment agreement. All major fund transfers require 2 authorized signatures from the development team. That's why Marcus added me as a signatory in the first place." "So they need either your signature or your removal as an authorized party," Lena concluded. "Without one of those, they can't access the remaining funds, which are how much? Another $7.8 million, scheduled to be released in tranches over the next 30 days. I pulled up the project timeline on my phone. The investors release funds as construction milestones are met. Nina leaned forward. "But construction has barely started. I drove by the site last week. They've only completed basic groundwork." Daniel and Lena exchanged glances. "They're falsifying progress reports to trigger the fund releases," Daniel said, "then planning to disappear with the money before anyone realizes the resort isn't being built as specified." "Classic exit strategy," Lena agreed. "They probably have their next identities already prepared." The realization hit me hard. This wasn't just about betraying me personally. Marcus was betraying everyone who had trusted in his vision for the resort. Investors, contractors, employees, all would be left with nothing while he and Veronica vanished with millions. "What do you need from me?" I asked, suddenly exhausted. "Cooperation," Daniel said simply. "We need to build an airtight case, which means collecting evidence legally. That could take time." "We don't have time," I protested. "They're transferring the rest of the funds by Friday." "We can freeze the accounts," Lena assured me. "But to make charges stick, We need more than just suspicious transfers. We need proof of intent to defraud. They have that all over the study, I said. The flowcharts, the transfer documents, it's all there. Which we can't access without a warrant, Daniel reminded me gently. And to get a warrant, we need probable cause that would stand up in court. I stared at them in frustration. So, they could get away with this, after everything they've done? Lena's expression softened slightly. Not if we do this right, but building a case takes time. I reached into my bag, fingers brushing against something smooth and cool. Professor Harrington's book on art forensics. I pulled it out, the worn leather cover a comfort in my hands. In art authentication, I said slowly, running my fingers over the embossed title. We sometimes have to let a suspected forgery proceed through initial verification stages to gather conclusive evidence. If we challenge too early, the forger can adjust their methods, make it harder to prove the deception. Nina caught on immediately. You want to play along. Let them think you're cooperating. I nodded, opening the book to where Professor Harrington had inscribed it. The best conservators know when to act and when to observe. Patience reveals what haste conceals. Under his signature was a small sketch of a magnifying glass over a painted canvas, his personal emblem that appeared on all his publications. I can go back tomorrow, I suggested, looking up at the agents. Tell them I've reviewed the papers and have questions. Keep them thinking I'm just trying to negotiate a better settlement. That could be dangerous, Daniel warned. If they suspect you know about the fraud? They won't, I insisted. They see me as the devastated wife, too emotional to think clearly. It's actually quite offensive how little they think of me. I held up the book. But Professor Harrington taught me that people's assumptions about you can be your greatest advantage. Lena considered this. We could wire you, record conversations legally with your consent. And I could accompany you, Nina added, as your emotional support person. 2 women in distress are even less threatening than one. The plan took shape as we talked. I would return tomorrow, ostensibly to discuss settlement terms, wearing a wire to gather admissible evidence. Meanwhile, the FBI would expedite warrant applications based on the information I'd provided. What about my personal documents? I asked. My research materials? My grandmother's jewelry? Document everything missing, Daniel advised. Take photos of empty spaces where your belongings should be. That builds the theft case separately from the fraud investigation. As the meeting concluded near midnight, I felt simultaneously drained and energized. The book in my hands, a gift from my mentor on the day I'd completed my doctorate, reminded me of everything I'd accomplished through methodical, patient work. The same skills that had allowed me to authenticate Renaissance masterpieces would now help me expose the counterfeit life my husband had created. We'll meet tomorrow morning to prep you and set up the recording equipment, Lena said, handing me her card. Try to get some rest, Miss Sinclair. Nina drove us to her apartment, a cozy 1-bedroom in an old converted factory building downtown. You can take the bed, she offered. I'll use the sofa. I won't sleep anyway, I admitted, setting my hastily packed bag in the corner of her living room. Nina disappeared into the kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of wine. For medicinal purposes, she said, handing me one. Doctor's orders. I accepted the glass gratefully, taking a long sip before setting it on the coffee table. I still can't believe any of this is happening. Yesterday, I had a husband, a home, a life I understood. Now you're discovering what was real and what wasn't, Nina finished, settling beside me on the couch. For what it's worth, your work is real, your talent is real, your friendships are real. She nudged my shoulder gently. Those are the things they can't take, no matter how hard they try. I ran my fingers over Professor Harrington's book again, drawing strength from its familiar texture. The small magnifying glass emblem on the inscription page caught my eye, the symbol of close examination, of seeing what others miss. It had guided my professional life for years, and now it would guide me through this personal labyrinth as well. "You're right," I said, straightening my shoulders. "And I'm going to make sure they don't take anything else from me, or from those investors who trusted Marcus's vision." As Nina prepared the sofa for herself, I sent a text to the unknown number I now knew was Marcus's burner phone. "Been reviewing. The papers. Have some questions. Coming by tomorrow afternoon to discuss." His response was swift. 3 p.m. Don't bring anyone. I showed Nina the message. "They're already getting nervous." "Good," she replied, her expression fierce with loyalty. "Let them sweat." I tried to sleep that night, lying in Nina's bed surrounded by the comforting scent of her lavender sachets. But my mind kept cycling through images. Veronica in my robe, Marcus's distant eyes, the financial flowchart pinned to the study wall, Professor Harrington's magnifying glass emblem. Eventually, I gave up on sleep and instead began making detailed lists of everything missing from the house, everything I'd need to recover, everything I'd observed about their scheme. By dawn, I had filled several pages with meticulous notes. I might have lost my husband and my home in a single day, but I hadn't lost the analytical mind that had built my career. And now, that mind was turned toward a different kind of authentication challenge, exposing the forgery that my marriage had become. The FBI field office bustled with morning activity as Agent Lena Winters fastened the wireless microphone to the underside of my blouse. The device was smaller than I'd expected, a flat black disc barely larger than a quarter. "This will pick up conversations within about 15 feet, she explained, checking the connection on a tablet. "Try not to touch it or adjust your clothing too obviously." "What if they search me?" I asked, the possibility having kept me awake most of the night. "They won't," Daniel said confidently, entering the room with a tray of coffee cups. "Based on their pattern, they believe they're in control of the situation. Searching you would suggest paranoia, which would undermine the narrative they're creating." "What narrative is that?" I accepted a coffee, grateful for the caffeine after my sleepless night. "That this is an amicable separation," Lena replied, adjusting the microphone's position slightly. "They need witnesses, friends, neighbors, colleagues, to see an apparently civilized process. It makes the eventual disappearance of funds less suspicious." Nina, who had been reviewing documents in the corner, looked up. "That's why they invited Renata to stay in the guest room. They're establishing a paper trail of reasonableness." "Exactly," Daniel confirmed. "We've seen this pattern before. They create a public story of mutual agreement while systematically isolating their target from resources and support systems." I thought about how thoroughly they had already dismantled my presence in the house, removing photos, reorganizing spaces, relegating my professional materials to haphazard boxes. It wasn't just practical, it was psychological warfare. "Speak normally, don't whisper," Lena instructed, stepping back to test the audio feed. "If you need to communicate something to us without them hearing, we've established the duress phrase, 'my mother's paintings.' Use that if you feel unsafe or need immediate extraction." I nodded, mentally rehearsing the phrase. "And you'll be nearby?" "Surveillance van 2 blocks away," Daniel confirmed. "Response team ready to move if needed, but our goal is to gather evidence without tipping them off." Nina squeezed my hand. "I still think you should let me come with you." "Too risky," Lena interjected. "The text specified coming alone. We don't want to make them suspicious." The gravity of what I was about to do settled over me as I studied the maps and photographs spread across the conference table. Surveillance images of Veronica with previous victims, financial diagrams tracking the movement of the resort funds, blueprints of my house marked with optimal recording locations. "There's something else you should know," Daniel said, his tone becoming more serious. "We've identified a pattern in Veronica Mercer's operations that suggests she doesn't work alone." "What do you mean?" I asked, suddenly alert. Lena pulled up a series of photographs on her tablet. In at least 3 previous cases, she had a partner who helped facilitate the financial aspects of the fraud, someone with banking experience who could navigate international finance systems. You think someone else is involved with Marcus and Veronica? The thought sent a chill through me. How many people had conspired to destroy my life? We're not certain, Daniel admitted, but be alert for mentions of anyone else involved in the scheme, particularly related to the offshore accounts. As final preparations were made, I pulled Professor Harrington's book from my bag, drawing courage from its familiar weight. Opening to the inscription page, I studied the magnifying glass emblem, symbol of close observation, of uncovering truth, beneath deception. That's one of Harrington's books, Lena noted with surprise. I attended his lecture series at the National Gallery years ago. He was my doctoral advisor, I explained. This was his gift when I completed my PhD. She smiled with newfound respect. His authentication methodology revolutionized the field. Observe, document, contextualize, verify. I used that framework in my early fraud investigations. The connection was unexpected but comforting, a reminder that the skills I'd honed in my professional life had broader applications. I'd spent years training to identify forgeries, to distinguish authentic provenance from fabricated histories. Now I would apply those same skills to exposing the forgery my husband had constructed. It's time, Daniel announced, checking his watch. Remember, your only job is to gather information. Don't confront them about the fraud directly. Let them believe you're focused solely on the divorce settlement. Nina hugged me tightly before I left. Channel your inner Renaissance master, she whispered. Calm, detailed, deliberate. The drive to what I still instinctively thought of as my house felt surreal. Yesterday, I'd been fleeing in confusion and pain. Today, I was returning with purpose, the weight of the recording device against my ribs a constant reminder of my mission. Both vehicles, the Range Rover and the Audi, sat in the driveway, confirming that Marcus and Veronica were home. I parked at the curb, taking a moment to center myself before approaching the door. This time, I didn't hesitate, but used my key decisively. The lock turned smoothly, but the door stuck slightly. Already the hinges needed the graphite spray I applied. Monthly maintenance detail Marcus had apparently overlooked in my absence. The entryway was empty, but I could hear movement in the kitchen. The house smelled different. Veronica's floral perfume had replaced the citrus essential oils I used. Another small erasure of my presence. "Hello?" I called out, hanging my coat on the rack by the door, a small act of ownership that felt quietly rebellious. Marcus emerged from the kitchen, a forced smile on his face. "Renata, right on time." "I'm Swiss by heritage," I replied coolly. "Punctuality is genetic." "Vanessa will join us shortly. She's on a call with a client." He gestured toward the living room. "Shall we?" I followed him, noting more changes since yesterday. My botanical prints had been removed from the walls, replaced by abstract canvases in aggressive red and black. The reading lamp my father had restored was gone, along with the hand-woven throw my mother had brought from Peru. "I see the redecorating continues," I observed, choosing a seat that would capture both Marcus's face and the doorway in the microphones. "Vanessa has an excellent eye," he replied, arranging himself in what had been my favorite armchair. The house needed updating. "Interesting timing for a renovation," I noted, opening my bag to extract the envelope of documents he'd given me. "Most people wait until after the divorce is finalized before erasing their ex from the home." His expression tightened. "I thought you wanted to discuss the settlement, not critique our interior design choices." "The settlement is precisely what I want to discuss." I removed the papers from the envelope, noting with professional detachment how my hands remained steady despite the anger churning beneath my calm exterior. "There are several points that Need clarification. Before I could continue, Veronica glided into the room, today dressed in a cream silk blouse and tailored pants that I recognized as mine, altered slightly to fit her taller frame. "Renata," she acknowledged with a tight smile, "I hope you've had time to process everything. These transitions are always difficult." "Some more than others," I replied evenly, "particularly when they involve identity theft and unauthorized clothing alterations." Her smile faltered momentarily. "Excuse me?" I gestured to her outfit. "That's my St. John blouse and the theory pants I bought in Milan last year. You've had the waist taken out and the hems let down." Marcus shifted, uncomfortably. "Renata, that's hardly relevant to—" "It's entirely relevant," I interrupted. "The settlement proposal suggests an equitable division of personal property, yet I find you wearing my clothes, sleeping in my bed, and drinking from my grandmother's crystal. So yes, I have questions about what equitable means in this context." Veronica's eyes narrowed dangerously before she recovered her composure. "There seems to be some confusion. Marcus gave me these items as gifts. From my closet? How generous of him to gift what wasn't his." I turned back to the documents. "Which brings me to my first question. The house is listed as your separate property, Marcus, yet our original purchase used my inheritance for the down payment. I have the wire transfer records from my grandfather's estate." Marcus leaned forward, his tone conciliatory but condescending. "Renata, I know this is emotional for you, but legally, the house title is solely in my name. Your contribution was a gift to the marriage." "A gift of $340,000? I raised an eyebrow. "That's quite generous. I should have kept receipts." "The law is clear on this," he insisted. "What matters is whose name is on the deed, not who provided funds." I noted how carefully he was avoiding any mention of the business assets or investment accounts, steering the conversation toward the house, away from the Pacific Shores project. "Let's move on to the business interests," I said, flipping to that section of the documents. "I notice you've included a transfer of signatory authority for all business accounts, including the resort development project." Veronica interjected, smoothly. "Marcus feels it would be cleaner to separate completely, personal and professional. A fresh start for both of you." "A fresh start that conveniently removes my oversight of $12 million in investor funds," I observed. "Funds that require dual authorization for major transfers." A subtle tension crackled between them, a quick glance exchanged, Marcus's fingers tightening on the chair arm. "That's standard legal practice in divorces involving business interests," Marcus replied, his casual tone at odds with his rigid posture. "Centralizing control prevents operational disruptions." "Interesting," I said, making a show of examining the documents. "Because when I spoke with Howard Jeffries yesterday, he seemed surprised by the request to remove me as a signatory. The name, belonging to the lead investor I hadn't actually contacted yet, landed like a stone in still water." Marcus's face paled slightly. "You spoke with Howard?" His voice remained controlled, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, a tell. I recognized from years of watching him bluff during poker nights with friends. "Of course," I lied smoothly. "When I saw these transfer requests, I thought it prudent to understand the implications for the investor group. Howard suggested I might want to consult with the project's financial advisor before signing anything." I paused deliberately. "Someone named Garrett, I believe." The name, completely fabricated, hung in the air between us. Veronica's eyes widened fractionally before she composed herself. "Thomas Garrett," she corrected automatically, then immediately pressed her lips together, realizing her mistake. Bingo. The third conspirator had a name. Marcus stood abruptly. "I think we should continue this discussion when our attorneys are present. You're clearly approaching this from an adversarial position." I remained seated, projecting calm. "I'm approaching this as someone who wants to understand exactly what I'm being asked to sign away." That seems reasonable, doesn't it? Of course it's reasonable, Veronica interjected, shooting Marcus a warning look. We all want this to be amicable. Perhaps we've moved too quickly in our enthusiasm to resolve matters. She was good, pivoting smoothly to maintain the appearance of reasonableness while subtly signaling Marcus to back down. In another circumstance, I might have admired her interpersonal dexterity. I'll need time to review everything with my own attorney, I said, returning the papers to the envelope. And I'll need access to my personal records, which seem to have disappeared from the study. Everything's still being organized, Marcus hedged. Maybe next week would be better to continue these discussions. But next week would be too late. By Friday, they planned to have the remaining funds transferred. I needed to keep pressure on them, force them to reveal more about their scheme. Actually, I said, standing with deliberate slowness, I'll need my financial documents sooner. My tax preparer called about the quarterly estimates, and I'll need my records from the safe. As I said yesterday, everything's in storage, Marcus replied too quickly. Then I'll need the storage unit information, I countered. Unless you'd prefer I report the documents as stolen? The word stolen hung between us, charged with implication. Veronica stepped in smoothly. I'm sure we can find what you need, Renata. Why don't you make a list of the specific documents, and we'll locate them for you? That's very accommodating, I said with a thin smile. While you're at it, I'll need my grandmother's jewelry collection and my external hard drives with my research data. Those seem to have gone missing as well. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then exchanged a look with Veronica. I need to take this. Work emergency. As he stepped out of the room, I turned to Veronica, who watched me with newfound wariness. The pretense of friendly transition had evaporated, replaced by the calculating assessment of an adversary reevaluating their opponent. You know, she said quietly once Marcus was out of earshot, this would be so much easier if you simply accepted what's happening. Fighting only prolongs the inevitable. And what's inevitable, Vanessa? I asked, emphasizing her false name. Or should I call you something else? A flicker of something, surprise, alarm, crossed her features before disappearing behind. A practiced smile. I don't know what Marcus has told you about me, but I assure you I'm exactly who I say I am. How interesting, I replied, gathering my bag. Because I'm exactly who I say I am too. And unlike some people in this house, I have the documentation to prove it. The subtle threat registered. Her posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Tell Marcus I'll be in touch about those documents, I said, moving toward the door. Oh, and Vanessa? The St. John blouse needs to be dry cleaned on delicate. Wouldn't want anything valuable to be damaged through improper handling. As I walked to my car, I heard Marcus's and Veronica's voices raised in urgent discussion behind the closed door. The wire had captured everything. Veronica's slip about Thomas Garrett, their evasions about the missing documents, the tension when I mentioned speaking to investors. It wasn't yet enough to prove fraud, but it was a start, the first threads unraveling in their carefully constructed deception. I texted Nina as I drove away. Phase 1 complete. We have a name, Thomas Garrett. Her reply came seconds later. Agents already running it. Meet at the secondary location. The secondary location, a coffee shop we'd selected as a secure meeting point, was 20 minutes away. As I drove, I mentally reviewed the interaction, analyzing each response, each microexpression, each evasion. Professor Harrington had taught me that forgeries reveal themselves not through what they show, but through what they attempt to conceal. And Marcus and Veronica were concealing a great deal indeed. The secondary location, Copperleaf Cafe, buzzed, with mid-afternoon patrons, providing excellent cover for our meeting. Nina had secured a corner booth with clear sightlines to both entrances, her years of art security consulting evident in the strategic choice. Agent Winters was already there, dressed in casual clothes that wouldn't draw attention, a laptop open, in front of her. Daniel arrived moments after I did, carrying a nondescript messenger bag. "Well done," Lena said as I slid into the booth. "The recording is clear, and you got them talking about exactly what we needed." "Thomas Garrett," Daniel confirmed, setting up a small device that would prevent electronic eavesdropping. "We've already got preliminary hits. Former investment. Banker lost his license 3 years ago for securities fraud, served 14 months of a 3-year sentence." "Veronica's financial expert," I surmised, accepting the tea Nina pushed toward me. "The one who knows how to move money through offshore accounts." Elena nodded. "We believe he's the missing piece in several of her previous operations. We could never prove the connection before." "But it's still not enough, is it?" I asked, already knowing the answer from their expressions. "Not for an arrest warrant," Daniel admitted. "We need concrete evidence of their intent to defraud the investors, not just suspicious behavior and name-dropping." I sipped my tea, gathering my thoughts. They're clearly concerned I spoke with the investors, and they're definitely hiding documents, not just my personal papers, but financial records they don't want me to access. "Typical for this stage of their operation," Lena explained. "They're creating documentation gaps that will make the fraud harder to track later." Nina, who had been studying something on her tablet, looked up. "I've been analyzing the resort project timeline. The next major fund release, $2 million, is scheduled for tomorrow based on the completion of foundation work. But you said the site only has basic groundwork done," I recalled. "Exactly. Someone's falsifying the construction progress reports to trigger the payments." She turned her tablet to show us photographs of the construction site, little more than cleared, ground with minimal foundation work, nowhere near the stage described in the official reports. Daniel leaned forward. "If we can prove they're submitting false progress reports to release funds, that's our smoking gun." "The reports would be in Marcus's home office," I said, "along with the transfer authorizations they need me to sign." Lena and Daniel exchanged looks. "We still don't have enough for a search warrant," Lena said. "We need more." "What about the recording from today?" I asked. Veronica admitted to being in possession of my belongings, and Marcus lied about the house purchase. "It shows deceptive behavior," Daniel acknowledged, "but not necessarily criminal intent regarding the investor funds. Divorce disputes over property happen all the time. It's not enough for a judge to approve a warrant." Frustration built within me. Every hour that passed was another hour for them to cover their tracks, to move more money, to further erase my existence. "There has to be something else we can do," I insisted. "Some way to get access to those documents legally." Nina suddenly straightened, her expression brightening. "What about your restoration notes? You said they were in boxes in the study." "Yes, but those are your intellectual property," she continued. "Professional work product essential to your career. You could reasonably request immediate access to retrieve them." Lena caught on immediately. "And while you're there, if you happen to see evidence of fraud in plain sight, it could establish probable cause," Daniel finished, "especially with one of us present as a witness." "But they'd never let an FBI agent into the house," I pointed out. "They don't need to know I'm FBI," Lena replied with a slight smile. "I could be your friend helping you carry boxes. Or better yet, your attorney." The plan took shape quickly. I would request access to retrieve my professional materials, bringing Lena as my legal advisor to witness. If we spotted evidence of fraud in plain sight that could establish the probable cause needed for a warrant. "It might work," Daniel admitted, "but the timing is crucial. We need to move before they realize we're onto the Thomas Garrett connection." "I'll text Marcus now," I decided, pulling out my phone. "Request access for this evening." They were clearly rattled by our conversation. They might agree, just to appear reasonable. As I drafted the message, Nina continued studying the project documents. "There's something else," she said slowly. The investor agreement includes a clause allowing any authorized signatory to request an independent audit if they suspect financial irregularities. I paused mid-text. I'm still an authorized signatory. Exactly, Nina said, her expression serious. You could formally request an audit of the project accounts, which would freeze all funds pending the audit's completion, Lena added, catching on. That could buy us time to gather more evidence. But it would also alert them that I suspect financial misconduct, I pointed out. They might accelerate their timeline. Daniel considered this. Or it might pressure them into making mistakes. People rarely stick to careful plans when they panic. I thought about it, weighing the risks against the benefits. Let's hold the audit request in reserve, I decided. If tonight's visit doesn't yield what we need, that's our backup strategy. I sent the text to Marcus. Need to retrieve essential work materials from my boxes tonight. Critical deadline for museum project. Bringing my attorney to ensure proper documentation of removed items. 7 p.m. The response came faster than I expected. Not a good time, schedule still being organized. I showed the others. Translation, they don't want me in the house. Push back, Nina suggested. Make it clear this isn't a request. I typed a response. Not negotiable. These materials represent 5 years of professional research and are my intellectual property. Failure to provide access will result in immediate legal action for both the materials and all missing personal property. My attorney has already drafted the complaint. The minutes stretched as we waited for a response. Finally, my phone buzzed. Fine. 7 p.m. 1 hour maximum. Your attorney stays in the living room. I showed the screen to the others. We're in. But they're restricting my movements, Lena noted with a frown. We can work with that, I assured her. The study is visible from the living room if the door is open, and I know exactly what to look for now. For the next 2 hours, we prepared meticulously. Lena created a convincing cover as Caroline Drescher, attorney specializing in intellectual property, complete with business cards and a leather portfolio containing legal-looking documents. I made detailed lists of the materials I would legitimately need to retrieve, giving us a valid reason for our presence. Remember, Daniel cautioned as we finalized preparations, the goal is evidence collection, not confrontation. If you see something that could establish probable cause, document it discreetly and leave. We need this by the book. I nodded, understanding the delicate balance we were attempting to maintain. What about the wire? Should I wear it again? Too risky, Lena decided. If they discovered it, our entire operation could be compromised. I'll wear one instead. Less chance of them searching me if I'm presented as your attorney. As evening approached, we reviewed the plan one final time. Nina would remain in the surveillance van with Daniel, monitoring communications. Lena and I would enter the house at 7 p.m. sharp, with the primary goal of locating evidence of fraudulent financial reporting or offshore fund transfers. If anything feels wrong, Daniel emphasized, use the duress phrase immediately. Your safety is the priority. I touched Professor Harrington's book, which I'd kept in my bag throughout the day. The magnifying glass emblem on the inscription page seemed to wink at me, a reminder to look closely, to see what others missed, to trust my trained eye for detail. Ready? Lena asked as we prepared to leave the cafe. I thought about Marcus and Veronica sitting in my home, wearing my clothes, drinking from my glasses, planning to steal millions while destroying the life I'd built. The initial shock and pain had crystallized into something harder, more focused, a determination that bordered on ice-cold anger. Ready, I confirmed, my voice steady. As we drove toward the house, the evening sun casting long shadows across the familiar streets, I found myself mentally reciting Professor Harrington's authentication methodology. Observe, document, contextualize, verify. The same meticulous process I'd used to expose Renaissance forgeries would now help me expose the forgeries in my own life. The house came into view, both vehicles still in the driveway. Lights glowed warmly in the windows, a deceptive picture of domestic tranquility that concealed the betrayal within. I parked at the curb, taking a moment to center myself before the performance ahead. "Remember," Lena said quietly as we approached the door, "you're not a victim seeking justice. Not tonight. Tonight, you're an investigator gathering evidence." The distinction was crucial. Victims react emotionally, make mistakes, lose focus. Investigators observe methodically, document carefully, build cases systematically. I straightened my shoulders and pressed the doorbell, hearing its familiar chime echo through the house that was no longer my home. Each step now was part of a carefully constructed strategy, not just to reclaim what was mine, but to expose a fraud much larger than a failing marriage. The door swung open, revealing Marcus in casual business attire, his expression carefully neutral. "Right on time," he noted, stepping back to let us enter. "As I mentioned," I said with professional courtesy, "this is Caroline Drescher, my attorney." Lena extended her hand, every inch the confident legal professional in her tailored suit. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm here to document the retrieval of Dr. Sinclair's intellectual property and ensure no further professional materials are misappropriated." Marcus's jaw tightened at her tone, but he maintained his facade of reasonableness. "As I told Renata, we're simply organizing things during this transition. Nothing has been misappropriated." "Then this should be a straightforward process," Lena replied smoothly. "I understand I'm to remain in the living room while Dr. Sinclair retrieves her materials?" "That's correct," Marcus confirmed, gesturing toward the living room where Veronica was already seated, tablet in hand, watching us with calculated indifference. "We want to respect everyone's privacy during this difficult time." As we moved through the entryway, I noticed more changes, additional artwork I didn't recognize. My collection of art history volumes removed from the hallway bookshelves, replaced by decorative objects and fashion books. The systematic erasure of my presence continued. "The study is through there," Marcus indicated unnecessarily. "Your boxes are still where they were yesterday." I nodded, moving toward the study as Lena settled into the living room, positioning herself with a clear view of the study doorway. "I'll just be a moment," I told Marcus, entering the study with measured steps. The room was different again, more organized than yesterday, with the boxes of my materials pushed further into the corner. The financial flowchart I'd glimpsed was no longer visible on the wall, but the resort project blueprints remained spread across the glass desk. As I began sorting through my materials, I kept my peripheral vision trained on the room, scanning for anything that might constitute evidence of fraud. The filing cabinet beside the desk was partially open, revealing hanging folders labeled with what appeared to be investor names. I moved methodically through my boxes, placing needed items into the tote bags I'd brought, while gradually working my way closer to the desk and filing cabinet. From the living room, I could hear Lena engaging Marcus and Veronica in conversation about the legal aspects of intellectual property and divorce proceedings, keeping them distracted while I searched. On the corner of the desk, partially covered by a blueprint, I spotted a document titled Pacific Shores Phase 1 Completion Report. Carefully shifting position to block the view from the living room, I glanced at the report, which certified that foundation work was 100% complete as of September 20th, contradicting the photos Nina had shown me of the barely started site. The falsified progress report, exactly what we needed to establish probable cause. Without touching the document, I shifted slightly so that the report was visible from the doorway, then called out, "Ms. Drescher, could you help me determine which of these research materials fall under the intellectual property protections we discussed?" Lena rose smoothly, moving to the study doorway. Her gaze swept the room professionally before focusing briefly on the visible report. "Of course, Dr. Sinclair. Let me see what we're dealing with." Her eyes met mine with a subtle nod. She'd seen it. As she moved into the study, Marcus followed, suddenly alert. "I thought we agreed your attorney would remain in the living room." "I need her expertise to identify protected materials," I replied calmly. "Unless you'd prefer a comprehensive legal review of everything in these boxes?" His expression tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Fine, but please hurry. We have dinner plans." As Lena helped me sort through materials, she positioned herself to document as much of the room as possible without being obvious. While reaching for a portfolio in one of the boxes, I glimpsed a document in the partially open filing cabinet, a wire transfer authorization form with tomorrow's date, referencing the $3 $2 million fund release and routing instructions to a Cayman Islands account. The final piece we needed: proof of intent to divert the investor funds offshore. I carefully extracted a large portfolio from the box, using the eye movement to shield Lena as she quickly photographed the visible documents using a pen that concealed a miniature camera. "I believe that's everything essential," I announced after 20 minutes of methodical sorting. "The rest can wait until the property division is formalized." Marcus visibly relaxed, clearly eager to have us out of the study. "I'll walk you out." As we moved toward the front door, loaded with my recovered materials, Veronica remained in the living room, her posture tense despite her attempt at nonchalance. Her eyes tracked every item we carried, as if mentally inventorying what we were removing. "We'll be in touch regarding the remaining items," Lena said professionally as we reached the door. "Particularly the missing jewelry and financial documents Dr. Sinclair referenced." "As I said, everything is being organized," Marcus repeated, the line sounding more rehearsed with each iteration. "Once we've completed the inventory—" "A process that should include the rightful owner," Lena interrupted smoothly. "Perhaps we should schedule a full property documentation session for later this week." His smile tightened. "I'll check our availability and get back to you." As we walked to my car, maintaining our professional demeanor until we were safely inside, I finally allowed myself a small breath of relief. "Did you get what we needed?" Lena nodded, her expression carefully neutral until we had driven well away from the house. "The progress report and transfer authorization are exactly what we need for the warrant. Daniel is already preparing the application. With luck, we'll have approval by morning." "And then?" Her smile was grim but satisfied. "And then we bring them in, before a single dollar more leaves those accounts." As we drove toward the field office, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: vindication that their scheme was unraveling, grief for the marriage I had lost, and a growing sense of my own strength. I had walked into my former home not as a victim, but as an investigator, using the same skills that had built my professional reputation to now protect my future. Professor Harrington would have been proud. After all, he had always taught that the most dangerous forgeries were those that incorporated elements of truth, just as my marriage had contained genuine moments interwoven with elaborate deceptions. The art was in distinguishing one from the other, in separating authentic from counterfeit. And in that distinction, I was finding not just evidence, but freedom. The federal building hummed with activity despite the late hour. Daniel had commandeered a small conference room where we gathered around a table cluttered with evidence photographs, legal documents, and takeout containers, the detritus of an investigation gaining momentum. "Judge Hernandez is reviewing the warrant application now," he informed us, hanging up his phone. "She's thorough, but fair. If everything checks out, we should have approval by morning." Lena spread the photographs captured by her concealed camera across the table: the falsified construction report, the wire transfer authorization, glimpses of other documents visible in the filing cabinet. "The timeline is tight," she noted, pointing to the transfer date. "They're planning to move the next $2 million tomorrow afternoon when the investor funds are released." Nina, who had been examining the project documents, looked up sharply. "Which means we need to move before noon. Once those funds hit the project account, they'll transfer them immediately." The weight of tomorrow's operation settled over the room. After months of planning their scheme, Marcus, Veronica, and their accomplice, Thomas Garrett, were hours away from the next phase of their fraud, and we were racing against that clock. "What about my personal documents?" I asked, the practical question breaking through my exhaustion. "My birth certificate, social security card, financial records, they still have everything." "The search warrant will cover all evidence related to identity theft and financial fraud," Daniel assured me. "If your documents are in the house, we'll recover them." "And if they're not?" The question had been haunting me since discovering the extent of their scheme. Lena's expression softened slightly. "We'll deal with that if necessary. Identity documents can be replaced. The more pressing concern is stopping the fund transfers before the money disappears offshore." She was right, of course. The investor funds, millions of dollars from people who had trusted Marcus's vision for the resort, took priority over my personal papers. Yet the thought of my entire documented existence in their hands left me deeply uneasy. "You should get some rest," Nina suggested gently. "Tomorrow will be intense." Rest seemed impossible with my mind racing through scenarios, cataloging potential hiding places for documents, anticipating Marcus and Veronica's reactions when federal agents arrived with a search warrant. But my body was betraying me. 3 weeks of hospital vigils followed by 2 days of emotional upheaval had depleted my reserves. "I'll drive you back to my place," Nina offered, seeing my fatigue. "The agents know how to reach us if the warrant comes through earlier." As we prepared to leave, Daniel handed me a sealed envelope. "This just arrived from the Denver field office. It's the information you requested about your mother's security." I'd almost forgotten my request. In the chaos of the past 2 days, I'd had a sudden fear that Marcus and Veronica might target my mother, still recovering in the hospital. I'd asked Daniel to ensure she had protection, just in case. "Thank you," I said, tucking the envelope into my bag alongside Professor Harrington's book. "For everything." Back at Nina's apartment, I sank onto her sofa, too wired to sleep despite my exhaustion. Nina made tea, then settled beside me, her presence a steady comfort in the storm my life had become. "Open it," she encouraged, nodding toward the envelope from Daniel. "It might help you rest easier." I broke the seal, finding a brief report confirming that security measures had been implemented at my mother's hospital without alarming her. A discreet agent positioned near her room, her medical file flagged to prevent unauthorized access. Or medication changes, her phone monitored for suspicious calls. "They're thorough," Nina observed, reading over my shoulder. "They have to be." I set the report aside, a weight lifting from my shoulders. At least my mother was safe while she recovered, unaware of the chaos unfolding in my life. Nina disappeared into her bedroom, returning with a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. "This arrived while you were at the house tonight. Special delivery from your mother's neighbor in Denver." I recognized the box immediately, my mother's keepsake container, where she stored cherished family mementos. "How did she know to send this?" "Apparently you called her from the hospital last week, mentioned staying at my place when you returned." Nina shrugged. "She said something about you needing your history right now." My mother's intuition had always been uncanny, but this was remarkable even for her. Somehow, she had sensed I would need tangible connections to my past at exactly the moment when others were trying to erase it. I opened the box carefully, finding it packed with family photographs, my parents' wedding rings, my grandmother's silver locket, and beneath these treasures, a sealed envelope with my name written in my mother's elegant script. She included a letter, I murmured, breaking the seal with trembling fingers. "My dearest Renata, by the time you read this, I'll be well into my recovery, and you'll be back in Seattle facing whatever prompted that shadow I heard in your voice during our calls. You've always been my straightforward daughter, never hiding your feelings, so when you began speaking of Marcus with careful neutrality, I knew something was amiss. I'm sending you our family treasures, not because they're valuable in any monetary sense, but because they are tangible reminders of who you are and where you come from. Your grandmother survived war and displacement with nothing but her wedding ring and the knowledge in her mind. Your father rebuilt his career after losing everything in the recession. And I, as you know, began again after your father's death, with nothing but determination and love for you. Resilience runs in our blood, Renata. Whatever you're facing now, and my heart tells me it's significant, remember that you come from people who know how to begin again. People who understand that what truly matters can never be taken from you. The art historian in you knows that the most valuable paintings have survived centuries of tumult, changing hands, enduring poor storage, suffering amateur restoration, attempts, yet their essential beauty and significance remain. You are much the same, my love. Circumstances may alter your external circumstances, but they cannot diminish your core. When this trial has passed, and it will pass, come to me, in Denver. We'll sit in the garden, drink too much wine, and you can tell me everything or nothing as you choose. Until then, know that you carry within you all the strength you need. All my love. Mom tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. Not tears of grief, but of recognition. My mother had given me exactly what I needed. Not advice about a situation she didn't fully understand, but a reminder of the resilience that was my birthright. She knows, Nina said softly, reading my expression rather than the private letter. Not the details, but she knows you're in a fight. She always does. I carefully returned the letter to its envelope, then placed it back in the wooden box. Alongside the family treasures, physical reminders of a history Marcus and Veronica couldn't erase, no matter how many documents they stole. My phone buzzed with a text from Lena. Warrant approved. Briefing at 6 a.m. Be ready. I showed Nina the message, feeling a surge of nervous energy. It's happening. Try to sleep, she advised. Tomorrow will require all your focus. But sleep remained elusive. Instead, I found myself at Nina's kitchen table at 3 a.m., spreading the contents of my mother's keepsake box before me, photographs of 4 generations of women in my family, each one who had faced challenges and emerged stronger. Great-grandmother Elena, who had fled Europe with nothing but her children and the clothes on her back. Grandmother Sophia, who had worked as a seamstress while putting herself through night school. My mother, who had reinvented herself after my father's death, turning her gardening hobby into a thriving landscape design business. And me, Dr. Renata Sinclair, art historian and authenticator, trained to distinguish genuine masterpieces from clever forgeries. A woman who had built a reputation on her ability to see what others missed, to detect deception beneath beautiful surfaces. As I traced the determined faces of my foremothers, something Professor Harrington had told me years ago resurfaced. Authentication isn't just about exposing forgeries, it's about affirming authenticity, about ensuring that what is genuine receives the recognition and protection it deserves. That was what tomorrow was truly about. Not just exposing Marcus and Veronica's fraud, but reclaiming and affirming my authentic self, the woman who existed before and would exist after this betrayal. I gathered the photographs and mementos, returning them to the wooden box. Then I pulled out a notebook and began writing, not case notes or evidence lists, but a letter to myself, a documentation of who I was beyond my relationship with Marcus, beyond the home we'd shared, beyond the possessions they had taken. By dawn, I had filled several pages, the writing becoming a kind of meditation, identifying what was truly mine, what was genuinely important, what could never be stolen. My education, my professional skills, my relationships with people who actually knew and valued me, my capacity to begin again. When Nina emerged from her bedroom at 5:30 a.m., she found me dressed and ready, a new clarity in my expression. You didn't sleep, she observed, putting on coffee. I did something better, I replied, showing her the notebook. I remembered who I am. She smiled, understanding without needing further explanation. That's worth more than sleep. As we prepared to leave for the federal building, I tucked my mother's wooden box safely into Nina's closet and slipped Professor Harrington's book into my bag. 2 talismans representing the wisdom that had shaped me. Family resilience and professional discernment. The brightening sky promised a clear day as we drove downtown. Whatever happened in the coming hours, whether the operation succeeded completely or encountered complications, I knew I would face it not as a victim seeking restoration of what was lost, but as a woman standing firmly in her own authenticity. Marcus had betrayed me. Veronica had invaded my space. Together they had attempted to erase my existence on paper. But in doing so, they had inadvertently forced me to define myself more clearly than ever before, to distinguish between the external markers of identity they had stolen and the internal core they could never touch. My mother was right. Resilience ran in our blood. And today, that resilience would face its test. The federal building came into view, its windows catching the early morning light. Agents would be gathering now, preparing for the raid, reviewing the evidence we had collected. Soon, Marcus and Veronica would face the consequences of their actions. Not just the dissolution of a marriage, but federal charges carrying serious penalties. As Nina parked, I touched the spine of Professor Harrington's book once more, drawing strength from its familiar texture. Then I squared my shoulders and stepped out into the crisp morning air, ready to reclaim not just my documents and possessions, but my future. The operation to expose the counterfeit life my husband had created was about to begin. And I, the expert in distinguishing fake from authentic, was precisely the right person to lead it. The FBI field office briefing room buzzed with focused energy. A dozen agents in tactical gear reviewed building layouts and photographs, while Daniel outlined the operation parameters. On a large whiteboard, 3 photographs were prominently displayed. Marcus, Veronica, Margaret, and a balding man with shrewd eyes whom I now knew to be Thomas Garrett. Our primary objectives are evidence preservation and suspect apprehension, Daniel explained as I settled into a chair near the front. Based on financial records, we believe they're planning to transfer $3 million to offshore accounts this afternoon. The resort investors are releasing funds at 11 a.m., which gives us a narrow window. Lena entered, carrying a thick folder stamped with a judge's seal. Warrants finalized. We're cleared for full-spectrum search of both the residence and Marcus. Sinclair's office at Sinclair Architectural Design. I hadn't even considered his downtown office. You think there's evidence there too? Financial fraud this sophisticated typically involves multiple locations, Lena explained. We're simultaneously executing search warrants at both properties. The comprehensive nature of the operation was both reassuring and overwhelming. In just 48 hours, my private marital crisis had expanded into a full-blown federal investigation. Dr. Sinclair will accompany Alpha Team to the residence, Daniel continued. Her knowledge of the property layout and document locations will be crucial for efficient evidence recovery. Several agents glanced my way, their expressions a mixture of professional assessment and subtle sympathy. I straightened instinctively, determined to project competence rather than victimhood. Ms. Chen will remain in the command vehicle as civilian liaison, Daniel added, nodding toward Nina. Beta Team will secure the downtown office location. Agent Winters will coordinate between both operations. The briefing continued with tactical details, entry protocols, and evidence handling procedures. I listened carefully, mentally mapping the locations in my home where important documents might be hidden, places that wouldn't be obvious to agents who didn't know the house's history and quirks. Operation commences at 8:30, Daniel concluded. Full radio discipline from this point forward. As the room emptied, agents moving with practiced efficiency toward their assigned vehicles Lena approached with a thin folder. "These are your personal protections," she explained, opening it to reveal temporary restraining orders. "These prevent Marcus, Veronica Mercer, or Thomas Garrett from contacting you during the investigation." "Will I need these?" I asked, the reality of potential retaliation suddenly concrete. "Probably not," she admitted. "Once in custody, their communications will be monitored. But in fraud cases with identity theft components, it's standard procedure to create legal distance between perpetrators and victims." Victim. The word still jarred against my self-perception, but I couldn't deny its technical accuracy. I signed the forms, hoping they would prove unnecessary. Nina joined us, outfitted, with a visitor badge and observer credentials. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be," I replied, gathering my bag. The weight of Professor Harrington's book inside was reassuring. A tangible connection to my professional identity outside this personal chaos. In the parking garage, we boarded an unmarked van equipped with communications equipment and surveillance. Monitors. 2 technical specialists were already inside, establishing connections with the field teams. 10 minutes to target," announced the driver as we pulled into traffic. I stared at the monitor displaying a satellite view of my neighborhood, my home reduced to a tactical objective. The surreal quality of the situation intensified as I watched colored dots representing FBI teams converge on the location I'd once considered a sanctuary. "Alpha team in position," crackled through the communication system, "waiting for go signal." Nina squeezed my hand, her silent support anchoring me as the operation unfolded across multiple screens and radio channels. "Beta team ready at secondary." Location. "Command authorizes execution of both warrants. Proceed." The screen switched to body camera feeds, creating a disorienting patchwork of perspectives as agents approached both properties simultaneously. I focused on the feed showing my front door, watching as an agent rang the doorbell with deliberate normalcy despite the tactical team positioned out of sight. Long moments passed before the door opened, revealing Marcus in workout clothes, clearly surprised by the early morning visitors. "Marcus Sinclair?" The agent's voice was professionally neutral. "FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with an investigation into wire fraud, identity theft, and financial crimes." The shock on Marcus's face was profound, mouth slightly open, color draining visibly even through the body camera's imperfect resolution. He seemed genuinely unable to process what was happening as agents presented the warrant and entered the house. "Is anyone else on the premises?" an agent demanded. Marcus appeared to struggle with the question before answering. "My partner, upstairs, still sleeping." "Alpha 1 to command," came the radio transmission. "Primary subject secured, proceeding to locate secondary subject." I watched in surreal detachment as my home was systematically secured. Agents, moving efficiently through rooms I had designed and furnished with loving care, now transformed into a crime scene. Marcus was directed to sit on the living room sofa, his expression oscillating between confusion and growing fear as the reality of his situation became clearer. "Second subject located," reported another agent. The camera feed showed Veronica being escorted downstairs in silk pajamas, my silk pajamas, her composure remarkably intact despite the circumstances. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, managing to sound imperious even while surrounded by federal agents. "Do you have any idea who we are?" "Ma'am, are you Vanessa Miller?" an agent asked, using the alias she had been operating under. Her hesitation was brief but telling. "Yes, what is this about?" "Please be seated while we execute our search warrant." The agent's tone left no room for argument. As the initial security phase completed, Daniel turned to me. "We're clear for your entry now. Remember, you're there solely to help identify and locate key evidence. No interaction with the subjects." Nina remained in the command vehicle while I transferred to a field unit that would take me to the house. The morning sun had fully risen by the time we arrived, casting an inappropriately cheerful light on the scene. Unmarked FBI vehicles lining the street, neighbors peeking curiously from windows, my front door standing open with agents moving purposefully in and out. Lena met me at the perimeter. They're both secured in the living room. Evidence recovery teams are starting systematic search, but we could use your guidance on priority locations. I nodded, steeling myself for what would undoubtedly be a surreal experience. Walking into my own home escorted by FBI agents, knowing my husband and his accomplice were being detained inside, it was a scenario so far removed from normal life that it possessed a dreamlike quality. The familiar foyer now bustled with methodical activity. Agents cataloging items, photographing rooms, setting up evidence collection stations. I kept my focus on Lena, deliberately avoiding looking toward the living room where I knew Marcus and Veronica were being held. The study first, I suggested, leading the way. Based on what we saw last night, that's where the financial documents were concentrated. The study had been transformed yet again, this time into a hub of investigative activity. An agent was already photographing the contents of the filing cabinet I'd noticed the previous evening, while another carefully documented the papers visible on the desk. "We've already located the falsified construction reports," Lena informed me, "and transfer authorizations for the offshore accounts. But we're looking for the identity documents you mentioned: birth certificate, social security card, financial records." I scanned the room, thinking like Marcus would think. "Check behind the bookshelf on the far wall," I suggested. "There's a hidden compartment we built when we renovated. It's designed to look like part of the cabinetry." Lena directed agents to the location, where they quickly discovered the concealed storage space, and inside, a locked metal security box. "That's not mine," I noted, studying the unfamiliar container. "We never kept anything like that in there." An evidence technician carefully removed the box, documenting its position before attempting to open it. The lock proved surprisingly simple, a basic key mechanism that yielded to specialized tools within minutes. Inside lay exactly what we were seeking: my birth certificate, social security card, passport copies, and financial documents, neatly organized alongside similar documents for at least 3 other people I didn't recognize. "Additional victims," Lena murmured, photographing the contents. "This significantly expands the case." As agents processed this evidence, I continued guiding the search team through the house, pointing out other potential hiding places: the false bottom in the master bedroom closet, the hollow space behind the kitchen kickboard, the waterproof compartment in the garden shed where Marcus had insisted on keeping emergency supplies. Each location yielded more evidence: financial records from the Pacific Shores project, investor documents with forged signatures, multiple sets of identification in various names for both Veronica and Thomas Garrett. In the garden shed, agents discovered a waterproof container holding over $50,000 in cash alongside 3 prepaid phones. "They were prepared for a quick exit," Lena observed. "This much cash suggests they anticipated potentially needing to flee." As the search continued, I found myself drawn to the master bedroom, now unrecognizable as the serene space I'd created. Veronica's possessions were scattered everywhere, my remaining clothes pushed to the periphery of what had been my closet. "Is there anything specific we should look for in here?" asked the agent documenting the room's contents. I hesitated, suddenly remembering something. The bedside table on the far side. It has a false bottom. Marcus designed it himself. The agent located the hidden compartment, revealing a small velvet jewelry pouch. Inside were my grandmother's pieces, the diamond earrings my grandfather had given her on their 50th anniversary, the sapphire pendant that had been passed down through 4 generations, the pearl bracelet I'd worn on my wedding day. "These are mine," I said quietly. The weight of what Marcus had done hitting me anew. He hadn't simply taken my jewelry, he had hidden family heirlooms, items of immense personal significance but relatively modest monetary value. "We'll document everything," the agent assured me, carefully photographing each piece. "All personal. Property will be returned once it's processed as evidence." As I turned to leave the bedroom, my gaze fell on the dresser where framed photographs had once displayed our history together. Our wedding, anniversaries, vacations. All had been removed, replaced by stylish abstract art and expensive candles. The systematic erasure of our shared past was complete. "Dr. Sinclair?" Lena called from the hallway. "We found something you should see." She led me to the guest bedroom, the room where Marcus had generously offered to let me stay just 2 nights ago. Agents had pulled up a section of carpet in the closet, revealing a floor safe I hadn't known existed. "This appears to be recently installed," Lena explained as a technician worked on opening it. "The carpet fibers show signs of having been cut and re-glued within the past few months." A hidden safe in the guest room, installed while I was still living in the house. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment betrayal. This was long-term planning, elaborate preparation for my eventual removal. The safe finally yielded, revealing stacks of documents, incorporation papers for shell companies, detailed identity packages for both Marcus and Veronica under new names, and property documents for a villa in Costa Rica. "Their exit strategy," Lena confirmed, examining the papers, "complete with new identities and an unreachable destination." Among these escape plans, something caught my eye, a manila envelope with my name on it. Inside were divorce papers, already bearing what appeared to be my signature on multiple pages. "This signature is forged," I said, showing Lena. "I never signed these." She called over a document specialist who photographed the papers from multiple angles. "Skillful forgery," he noted. "They probably used authentic signatures from other documents as templates." The divorce papers were dated 3 weeks earlier, while I was still in Denver with my mother, unaware that my marriage was not only ending but being retroactively dissolved through fraud. "Alpha command to all units," came a transmission over Lena's radio. "Be advised we have located Thomas Garrett. Subject is currently at Seattle First International Bank, attempting to access safe deposit boxes registered to Sinclair Architectural Design. Tactical team en route for apprehension." The third conspirator had been found, attempting to access financial resources even as his partners were being detained. The net was closing on all fronts. After 3 hours of methodical searching, the evidence collection was nearly complete. The house had yielded far more than even the agents had anticipated, proof not just of the Pacific Shores fraud, but documentation suggesting a pattern of similar schemes stretching back years. "Dr. Sinclair," Lena said as we stood in the foyer, surrounded by cataloged evidence bags, "you've been tremendously helpful. We have what we need now." The implication was clear. I was free to leave, to step away from this crime scene that had once been my home. Yet something held me there, a need for some form of closure that evidence collection couldn't provide. Could I hesitated, uncertain how to frame my request. "Is it possible to speak with Marcus? Just briefly?" Lena's expression shifted to concern. "That's not advisable at this stage. Any conversation could complicate the case." She was right, of course. Professional detachment had gotten me this far, had helped transform a personal betrayal into actionable evidence. Engaging directly with Marcus now risked undermining that detachment. "I understand," I conceded. "When will they be transported?" "Within the hour," she replied. "Initial arraignment will likely be tomorrow morning." As I prepared to leave, an agent approached with a small evidence bag. "Dr. Sinclair, we found this hidden in the study safe. The case agent thought you might want it documented specifically." Inside the clear plastic was my wedding ring, the platinum band with channel-set sapphires that I'd removed before my trip to Denver, leaving it in my jewelry box for safekeeping. Marcus had taken it, not to wear or keep as a sentimental object, but to hide away as if erasing even that symbol of our connection. I stared at the ring, suddenly conscious of the indentation that still marked my finger where it had resided for 7 years. Like the house itself, the ring represented something I had believed in completely, something that had turned out to be built on elaborately constructed lies. "Thank you," I said, returning the bag to the agent. "Please ensure it's included in the evidence documentation." As I walked toward the door, I allowed myself one last look at the living room where Marcus and Veronica sat under agent supervision. Neither looked in my direction, Marcus staring at the floor, Veronica maintaining her mask of indignant composure even as her carefully constructed world collapsed around her. In that moment, I realized I didn't need a confrontation or explanation. The evidence spoke more truthfully than anything they might say: the forged signatures, the hidden safe, the escape plans, the systematic erasure of my presence. The facts told a story clearer than any conversation could provide. Outside, the autumn sun illuminated my former home with unforgiving clarity, revealing peeling paint I hadn't noticed before, garden beds that had been neglected during my absence, a broken gutter that sagged precariously. The physical structure was already showing signs of the neglect that had long been present in the marriage it housed. Nina was waiting by the command vehicle, her expression a mixture of concern and relief. "You okay?" I considered the question carefully, taking stock of my emotional state. The shock and raw pain of the first discovery had evolved into something more complex, a clarity that bordered on liberation. "I will be," I answered truthfully, turning my back on the house as agents continued their work inside. "I think I just found exactly what I needed." What I had found wasn't just evidence of fraud or proof of betrayal, but confirmation of my own perceptions, validation that my reality had indeed been systematically manipulated by people I had trusted. And in that validation lay the first step toward reclaiming not just my legal identity, but my sense of self. The aftermath of the FBI raid unfolded with dizzying speed. By late afternoon, Marcus, Veronica, and Thomas Garrett were in federal custody, formal charges filed against all three: wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and financial crimes that carried potential sentences of decades in federal prison. Nina and I watched the local news coverage from her apartment, surreal footage of my husband and his accomplices being escorted into the federal building in handcuffs, their faces partially obscured but postures unmistakable. Marcus hunched and defeated, Veronica maintaining her imperious bearing despite the circumstances, Garrett looking nervously in all directions as if searching for an escape route. Federal authorities raided 2 locations this morning in connection with an alleged multi-million-dollar fraud scheme centered around the Pacific Shores Resort development, the reporter announced over footage of agents removing evidence boxes from my home. Sources indicate that over $4 million in investor funds have already been diverted to offshore accounts, with authorities moving in just before an additional $2 million was set to be transferred. I muted the television, unable to hear more of my private tragedy broadcast as the evening's financial crime story. "It doesn't even seem real," I murmured, sinking deeper into Nina's couch. "But it is," she replied, practical as always. "And now comes the complicated part: rebuilding." She was right. The raid had secured evidence and apprehended the perpetrators, but it had done nothing to restore what had been taken from me: my home, my sense of security, my documented identity, my professional stability. Those would require a different kind of work entirely. My phone rang, Agent Winters calling with an update. "The preliminary hearing is set for tomorrow at 10 a.m., she informed me. "All 3 defendants are being held without bail pending that appearance." "Will I need to be there?" I asked, uncertain whether I could face Marcus in a courtroom so soon. "Not required at this stage, though you're welcome to attend," Lena replied. "However, there is something else we should discuss. We've found evidence suggesting that Mr. Sinclair has been systematically liquidating your joint assets for the past several months. A new wave of nausea washed over me. What do you mean? Bank records indicate he's been transferring funds from your joint accounts to a series of shell companies since at least July, she explained. Approximately $465,000 in total, beyond what was taken from the investor funds. July, while we were still living together as apparently happy spouses, while I was planning our anniversary dinner and helping my mother prepare for her surgery. Even then, he had been methodically dismantling our financial life. Can it be recovered? I asked, the practical question emerging through the shock. Some of it, potentially, Lena hedged. We've frozen all accounts connected to the 3 suspects, but significant amounts were converted to cryptocurrency, which is more difficult to trace. After we hung up, I relayed the information to Nina, who immediately shifted into problem-solving mode. You need a forensic accountant and a good attorney specializing in financial fraud, she declared, already searching on her tablet. And we should check your credit reports immediately to see what else might have been compromised. While Nina made calls to her professional network, I logged into what financial accounts I could still access. The picture that emerged was grim: joint accounts emptied, credit cards maxed out with charges I hadn't made, investment accounts showing unusual transfer activity. Marcus hadn't simply been preparing to leave me, he had been systematically looting our financial life for months. This is financial abuse, Nina finished when I couldn't find the words. And unfortunately, it's common in cases like this. They isolate the victim physically and emotionally, while simultaneously undermining their financial independence. Victim again, that word that didn't align with my self-perception yet accurately described my situation. I had been victimized financially, my resources drained in a calculated effort to leave me vulnerable and dependent. A text from Daniel interrupted my financial archaeology. New development. Need to speak ASAP. When I called him back, his tone was grave. We've discovered a significant complication. Thomas Garrett made bail 2 hours ago. How is that possible? I demanded. Lena just told me they were all being held without bail. That was the initial determination, Daniel explained, frustration evident in his voice. But Garrett's attorney filed an emergency motion with a different judge, who granted bail with electronic monitoring. He surrendered his passport and paid $500,000 cash bond. Where would he get that kind of money if his accounts are frozen? That's what concerns us, Daniel replied. The bail was posted by a woman named Elise Garrett, allegedly his sister, though we're still verifying that relationship. The money came from an account that wasn't on our radar. The implications were unsettling. If Thomas Garrett had access to financial resources we hadn't identified, what else might have escaped detection? Is there any risk he could? I hesitated, the question feeling both paranoid and entirely reasonable given recent events. Come after you? Daniel finished bluntly. We don't believe so. He's under strict electronic monitoring with a no-contact order regarding anyone connected to the case. But as a precaution, we've arranged for additional patrols in Ms. Chen's neighborhood, and I'd advise limiting your movements to essential activities for the next few days. After we hung up, I relayed the development to Nina, whose expression darkened with concern. You're staying here indefinitely, she declared, brooking no argument. I'll have Philippe from Museum Security escort you to and from work when you're ready to return. The protective measures should have been reassuring, but instead, they underscored the continuing instability of my situation. Despite the morning's apparent victory, I remained vulnerable. My finances compromised, my legal identity still in disarray, and now facing potential threats from a co-conspirator who had unexpectedly secured release. There's more, Nina said, looking up from her tablet where she had been checking my credit reports. Someone applied for a mortgage in your name 3 weeks ago, And there are 2 new credit cards opened last month that you didn't authorize. The identity theft extended beyond what I had imagined. Even as Marcus maintained our marriage facade, even as he kissed me goodbye when I left for Denver, he and his partners had been assuming my identity for financial gain. How do I even begin to undo this? I asked, the magnitude of the task seeming insurmountable. One step at a time, Nina replied pragmatically. I've scheduled appointments with Eva Morales. She's the best financial fraud attorney in the state, and Michael Kwan, a forensic accountant who specializes in recovery after identity theft, both tomorrow morning. While her efficiency was comforting, the emotional weight of the situation was becoming crushing. In less than 72 hours, I had lost my home, discovered my husband's elaborate betrayal, participated in a federal raid, and now learned that my entire financial identity had been systematically compromised, all while a potential threat remained at large despite the legal system's supposed protections. The exhaustion I'd been fighting finally overwhelmed me. I sank onto Nina's sofa, a defeated surrender washing through my body. I can't do this, I whispered, the admission painful but honest. It's too much. Nina sat beside me, her presence steady and grounding. Not alone, you can't, she agreed. No one could, but you're not alone, Ren. As if to emphasize her point, my phone buzzed with messages. Colleagues from the museum offering support, my mother's neighbor in Denver checking in, even Professor Harrington himself, who had somehow heard about the situation and was offering both professional and personal assistance. Your network is rallying, Nina observed as the messages continued to arrive. That's how you'll get through this, not by attempting to handle it all yourself, but by accepting the support that's being offered. I scrolled through the messages, each one a small beacon in the darkness that had enveloped my life. These were people who knew me, the real me, not the wife Marcus had systematically devalued and deceived. They were offering not just practical help but affirmation of my identity beyond the roles that had been stripped away. You're right, I acknowledged, straightening slightly. I can't do everything at once, but I can take the next indicated step. That step, it turned out, was the most basic act of financial self-protection, placing fraud alerts on my credit reports, disputing unauthorized accounts, and documenting the identity theft for both federal authorities and financial institutions. Nina sat beside me through the tedious process, her organizational skills complementing my attention to detail as we created a comprehensive record of the financial destruction Marcus and his accomplices had wrought. By midnight, we had established the preliminary safety net, alerts placed, reports filed, appointments scheduled. It wasn't recovery, not yet, but it was containment, preventing further damage while we prepared for the lengthy process of reconstruction. As I finally prepared for sleep on Nina's uncomfortable sofa bed, my phone buzzed with one final message of the day, a text from Lena. New search warrant approved for additional property linked to Garrett, being executed at 6 a.m. will update. When complete. I showed Nina the message. At least the investigation is continuing. And expanding, she noted. That's a good sign for eventual recovery of assets. I set down the phone, too exhausted to speculate about what the new search might reveal. The day's developments had illustrated with painful clarity that this situation was far from resolved, that despite the morning's apparent victory, complications and obstacles would continue to emerge. As I drifted toward sleep, Professor Harrington's authentication methodology echoed in my mind. Observe, document, contextualize, verify. The same approach that had guided my professional work would now guide my personal recovery. Methodical, evidence-based, thorough. The path forward remained uncertain, obscured by the complications that continued to multiply. But I was no longer facing it alone, no longer operating without resources or support. And that perhaps was the most important development of this challenging day. The recognition that while Marcus had systematically isolated me from financial independence, He had failed to isolate me from the human connections that provided a different, more essential form of security. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own revelations, its own opportunities for reclamation. For tonight, I would rest in the knowledge that while much had been taken, much also remained, and what remained was the foundation upon which everything else could eventually be rebuilt. Morning arrived with unceremonious abruptness. Sunlight, filtering through Nina's blinds after a night of fitful sleep. I awakened disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was and why. Then reality crashed back, the weight of yesterday's discoveries settling heavily once more. Nina was already awake, dressed in crisp professional attire, her laptop open at the kitchen counter as she sipped coffee. She had transformed overnight from supportive friend to strategic coordinator, and I was profoundly grateful for her efficiency. "I've compiled a dossier of everything we know so far," she explained, sliding a printed folder across the counter as I reached for the coffee she'd poured me. "Financial records, identity theft documentation, the FBI's preliminary findings, everything. Eva and Michael will need to hit the ground running in our meetings today." The meticulous organization was precisely what I needed, a framework for understanding the chaos that had engulfed my life. I flipped through the pages, momentarily overwhelmed by the clinical documentation of betrayal. Account statements showing systematic withdrawals, credit inquiries I hadn't authorized, property transfers conducted without my knowledge. "There's one more thing," Nina said hesitantly. "I think we should discuss whether you want to attend Marcus's preliminary hearing this morning." The question caught me off guard. In the rush of crisis management, I'd pushed the court appearance from my mind. Did I want to see Marcus in that setting, handcuffed, facing a judge, the formal machinery of justice processing the man who had once been my husband? "What would Professor Harrington advise?" Nina asked gently, knowing how I valued my mentor's guidance. I considered the question, instinctively reaching for his book in my bag. "He'd say that observation is the foundation of understanding," I replied slowly. "That witnessing is different from engaging." Nina nodded. "The hearing is at 10. Our appointment with Eva isn't until 11:30. We could observe the proceedings without participating." The decision crystallized as I spoke. I need to see it. Not for closure or confrontation, but to fully comprehend what's happening. This isn't just happening to me. It's a federal case with multiple victims. I need to understand it in that broader context. "Then we'll go," Nina said simply. "But first, let's review our strategy for the financial recovery process." For the next hour, we methodically mapped out priorities: immediate financial stabilization, identity recovery, asset protection, and longer-term recovery planning. The task was daunting, but not impossible, especially with the specialized professionals Nina had engaged. At 9:30, we left for the federal courthouse downtown, arriving just as a media contingent was setting up outside. The Pacific Shores fraud had clearly captured public attention, a multi-million-dollar scheme involving a prominent architect made for compelling news. "Stay close," Nina murmured as we navigated around reporters who hadn't yet recognized me as a key figure in the case. "We'll enter through the side entrance." The courtroom was already filling when we slipped in, taking seats near the back where we could observe without being conspicuous. Federal prosecutors arranged materials at their table while defense attorneys conversed in low tones nearby. At precisely 10 o'clock, a side door opened, and marshals escorted the defendants in, first Thomas Garrett, then Veronica, and finally Marcus. The sight of my husband in standard-issue detention clothing, his hands cuffed before him, struck me with unexpected force. Despite everything, some part of me had still expected to see the confident, polished man I had married. Instead, Marcus looked diminished, shoulders hunched, face pale and unshaven, eyes darting nervously around the courtroom without settling on anything. When his gaze passed over the gallery where I sat, There was no flicker of recognition, no acknowledgement. He looked through me as if I were a stranger. Veronica, by contrast, had somehow maintained her composure. Her red hair was pulled back severely, her posture remained ramrod straight, and her expression conveyed affronted dignity rather than fear. Even in custody, she projected the confidence of someone accustomed to manipulating systems to her advantage. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Eleanor Winthrop entered, a silver-haired woman whose reputation for no-nonsense efficiency preceded her. The proceedings moved quickly through formal identifications and charge readings. The prosecution outlined the case in broad strokes: wire fraud involving over $7 million in investor funds, identity theft affecting multiple victims, conspiracy spanning at least 18 months, and financial crimes including money laundering through offshore accounts. When the judge asked for pleas, the differences between the defendants became stark. Garrett immediately pleaded not guilty, his attorney requesting consideration of a cooperation agreement. Veronica also pleaded not guilty, but with defiant emphasis that drew a warning look from the judge. Marcus hesitated when his turn came, looking momentarily lost until his attorney whispered something. "Not guilty, Your Honor," he finally managed, his voice barely audible in the courtroom. The prosecution moved directly to bail considerations. "The government strongly opposes bail for defendants Sinclair and Mercer," the lead prosecutor argued. "Both have demonstrated sophisticated planning for flight, including recently acquired identification documents under false names, property purchased in non-extradition countries, and significant unrecovered funds believed to be held in cryptocurrency wallets." Veronica's attorney countered with practiced smoothness, arguing that his client had deep community ties and no prior criminal record. The judge listened impassively before delivering her ruling. "Bail is denied for defendants Sinclair and Mercer," she declared without hesitation. "The court finds substantial risk of flight given the evidence presented. As for defendant Garrett, he will remain released under the conditions previously established, with additional restrictions on financial transactions and communication technologies." The remainder of the hearing focused on procedural matters: discovery, timelines, motion deadlines, preliminary trial scheduling. Throughout, I observed Marcus with detached analytical focus, studying him as I would study a painting suspected of being inauthentic, noting the discrepancies between the man before me and the one I thought I had known. His posture was wrong, shoulders curved inward rather than squared confidently. His responses to his attorney were hesitant rather than decisive. Even his physical appearance seemed altered beyond the circumstances, as if his very essence had shifted without the framework of deception to maintain it. Had this stranger always been present beneath the confident architect I'd married? Or had Veronica's influence transformed him over time, reshaping him into someone who could participate in elaborate fraud? The questions lingered without clear answers. As the judge adjourned the hearing, setting the next court date for 3 weeks hence, the defendants were led out in the same order they had entered. This time, Marcus's gaze did find me in the gallery. A moment of stunned recognition followed. By immediate avoidance, his eyes dropping to the floor as he was escorted away. "You okay?" Nina whispered as we remained seated, letting the courtroom clear before making our exit. "Yes," I replied, somewhat surprised to find it true. He handed me his tablet, displaying photographs of the storage unit contents. Among boxes of financial records and computer equipment was a familiar item, my laptop, the one Marcus had claimed was company property he'd reclaimed. "They kept it?" I asked, confused by the risk they'd taken holding on to such an identifiable item. "Not just kept it, they were using it," Daniel explained. "Our tech team's preliminary examination shows they installed key logging software and were accessing your professional accounts, email, and cloud storage. We believe they were monitoring your communications while you were in Denver to track when you might return." The invasion of privacy was breathtaking, not just my home and finances, but my professional identity and personal communications. had been compromised. They had been watching me even as I cared for my mother, reading my private messages, tracking my movements. "There's more," Daniel continued, scrolling to additional photographs. "We found extensive notes on your professional colleagues, your mother's medical condition, even surveillance photos of you at the museum and around the city dating back nearly a year. The images showed me entering the museum where I worked, meeting colleagues for coffee, shopping at my favorite bookstore, ordinary moments from my daily life captured through a predatory lens. They were studying me, I realized, the full implications, dawning slowly. Not just my finances or identity documents, but me, my habits, my relationships, my patterns." Daniel nodded grimly. "This appears to have been a highly targeted operation from the beginning. The psychological profiling is consistent with sophisticated long-con methodology, learning enough about the target to effectively impersonate them and predict their responses." Nina, who had been examining the photographs with growing alarm, looked up sharply. "This goes beyond financial fraud. This is stalking, psychological manipulation. Shouldn't there be additional charges?" "Our team is evaluating that possibility now," Daniel confirmed. "The prosecutors are particularly interested in the timeline these materials reveal. Based on dated surveillance, this operation began over 18 months ago, well before Ms. Mercer established a relationship with Mr. Sinclair. The implication struck me with physical force. You're saying that targeting Marcus was deliberate from the start? That their relationship wasn't random? The evidence suggests they identified him as an access point to you," Daniel explained. "Carefully. Your position at the museum, your family background, your financial status, all were documented in their research materials before Veronica ever approached Marcus. I was the primary target. Not Marcus, not even our joint assets, but me specifically. My identity, my professional standing, my financial resources. Marcus had been a means to an end rather than the central focus of their scheme. The revelation reconfigured my understanding of the entire situation. What I had interpreted as a marital betrayal was actually something far more calculated, a sophisticated operation in which my husband had become both accomplice and conduit." "Why me?" I asked, the question emerging before I could fully process its implications. "What made me worth this level of effort?" Daniel hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. "The materials suggest multiple factors. Your family connections, your professional reputation, your access to valuable artwork documentation, and, perhaps most significantly, your inheritance prospects." "My inheritance?" I echoed in confusion. "My grandfather's estate was settled years ago." Nina's expression shifted to one of sudden understanding. "Your mother's medical condition," she said quietly. "They were tracking her health status. Were there life insurance policies in your name listed in their documents?" Daniel nodded. "Several, including a substantial policy on your mother with you as sole beneficiary. Based on the surveillance timeline, interest in you intensified after her diagnosis last year. The coldly predatory nature of their calculation made me physically ill. They had targeted me in part because my mother was ill, had monitored her condition, presumably waiting for a potential inheritance that would add to their haul." "We should get to our appointment with Eva," Nina said gently, seeing my distress. "Daniel, we'll need copies of everything for the legal team." "Already arranged," he assured us. "The evidence recovery from the storage unit significantly strengthens both the criminal case and your position for civil recovery. Eva Morales is one of the best in the business. She'll know exactly how to leverage this information." As we left the courthouse, carefully avoiding the media still gathered outside, I struggled to process the morning's revelations. The preliminary hearing had confirmed the legal seriousness of the situation. The storage unit discovery had revealed its true scope and targeted nature. Together, They transformed my understanding from personal betrayal to something far more calculated. A sophisticated criminal enterprise in which I had been marked as a high-value target. In the car heading toward Eva Morales's downtown office, I found myself reaching once again for Professor Harrington's book, its weight and texture grounding me amid revelations that threatened to destabilize my understanding of the past several years of my life. "You know what's strange?" I said to Nina as we navigated through midday traffic. "I keep thinking about authentication methodology, how we establish provenance, how we detect forgeries through technological analysis and historical inconsistencies." She glanced at me, understanding dawning in her expression. "You're applying your professional framework to your personal situation." "Exactly. In authentication work, we don't just examine the artwork itself, we investigate its entire history. Where it's been, who's owned it, what's been done to it. We look for discrepancies in the narrative." "And you're seeing those discrepancies in your marriage now," Nina observed. I nodded, the parallel crystallizing as I spoke. When I authenticate a painting, I'm reconstructing reality beneath layers of potential deception. That's precisely what I need to do now, separate what was real in my life from what was fabricated. As our car pulled up in front of the sleek office building housing Eva Morales's practice, I felt a subtle shift in my perspective, from reactive victim to methodical investigator. The circumstances remained devastating, but my approach to them was evolving. "Ready?" Nina asked as we gathered our materials. I took a deep breath, focusing on the immediate task rather than the overwhelming whole. "Yes, this is just the next step in the authentication process." We entered the building, not just seeking legal representation, but beginning the methodical process of reclaiming what had been taken, separating genuine from counterfeit, authentic from forged, in the complex painting that had been my life. Eva Morales's office projected precisely the confidence her reputation had suggested. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline, minimalist furniture in brushed steel and leather, and walls adorned with framed legal journal covers, featuring her landmark cases. The attorney herself matched this aesthetic perfectly. Tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her silver-streaked dark hair cut in a precise bob that framed shrewd eyes behind designer glasses. "Dr. Sinclair," she greeted me, her handshake firm and businesslike. "Your situation is extraordinary even by my standards, and I specialize in financial fraud cases." "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice," I replied, as we settled into the conference room where Michael Kwan, the forensic accountant, already waited with multiple laptops open before him. "The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit referred you personally," Eva acknowledged. "Agent Winters speaks highly of your composure, under extraordinary circumstances. Now, let's establish our objectives clearly." For the next half hour, I outlined the situation while Michael and Eva took detailed notes, occasionally interrupting with targeted questions about accounts, assets, and timelines. Neither expressed shock or sympathy. Their professional